Hey, Robby, tell us what's on your radar.
Taking note of a supposed spike in harassment and intimidating behavior directed at public school officials, Attorney General Merrick Garland has instructed the FBI to be on the lookout for angry parents demanding accountability at school board meetings. On Monday, Garland sent a memo to the federal law enforcement agency directing it to coordinate with the nation's 14,000 school districts. This action comes after the Biden administration received a plea from the National School Boards Association to protect schools from the, quote, imminent threat of parents sending, again, quote, threatening letters and cyberbullying school officials. The association considers such activities to be akin to, once again, quote, domestic terrorism. As these acts of malice, violence, and threats against public school officials have increased, the classification of these heinous actions could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes, wrote the NSBA. Has some great number of teachers, principals, and district leaders come under violent attack suddenly? Of course not. What both the Justice Department and the concerned school boards are really talking about is the increased number of recent community meetings that have featured angry feedback from parents. Here's a clip from a June 2021 Loudoun County School Board meeting.
You're teaching children to hate others because of their skin color, and you're forcing them to lie about other kids' gender. I am disgusted by your bigotry.
Joe Mobley, to be followed by Donna Russell. Madam Chair, I move to end public comment.
Some parents are sick of COVID-19 mitigation efforts that have relegated actual students to afterthought status within the education department. The farce of virtual learning, mandatory closure when asymptomatic cases are detected, ceaseless masking. Young people who have the least to fear from the pandemic, from severe disease and death rate, from COVID, it's very, very low for them, as we've said on the show repeatedly. They've been forced to make tremendous educational and social sacrifices to bend the cure of COVID-19. Families are fed up with a public education system that puts the needs of students last, and they're speaking up about it. Now, many parents are also increasingly concerned about the curriculum in their schools. Garland's memo garnered widespread attention in conservative media circles yesterday after it was shared on Twitter by Christopher Rufo, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute who works to expose what he has termed critical race theory. Now, as I've explained on previous radars, whether or not CRT is literally being taught in many K-12 schools hinges in part on a semantics argument. Critical race theory, the obscure academic theory positing that the structures of U.S. society are racist to their core, and thus it is impossible to separate or ignore racism when confronting other issues, that's not exactly sweeping U.S. kindergartens. But critical race theory, the tendency to reduce individuals to crude racial stereotypes that is pushed by divisive and misguided anti-whiteness gurus like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, that has certainly become an important component of corporate and university diversity training and is to some extent trickling down to K-12 instruction. I've seen some evidence of that. So parents should be forgiven for not wanting their kids to be taught from the perspective that objectivism, individuality, and a sense of urgency are aspects of whiteness, and that black students struggle to think analytically for racial and cultural reasons. Those are racist assumptions. They are false, and they do not belong in schools. Yet they were elements of characteristics of white supremacy culture, an instructional document that has drawn plenty of citations in educational settings. To the extent that the phrase critical race theory is shorthand for this sort of thing, then the outrage about it seems justified to me. But even if it were not justified, parents should still enjoy the right to speak up at school board meetings and demand a say in their children's education. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, a Democrat, recently lashed out at anti-CRT efforts, asserting that, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach." He must have forgotten that the public school system is supposed to serve the needs of families, not the other way around. Excessive, direct meddling in the day-to-day teaching decisions of teachers can indeed be burdensome and counterproductive. But these parents aren't monitoring the classrooms. They're showing up to public meetings to exercise their First Amendment rights and participate in the democratic process of managing a public institution. And they often encounter furious resistance from public officials who have turned off microphones, ended comment periods early, and occasionally mocked the parents behind their backs. It's true that some school board meetings have turned raucous, and undoubtedly there are examples of parents overreacting or even engaging in harassment. But there's no evidence whatsoever that this represents some great danger necessitating the involvement of the FBI. Teachers deserve to feel safe from the threat of violence, yes, as do all of us. But parents deserve to speak up at meetings without worrying that the FBI will investigate them. Garland's memo begins by noting that spirited debate about policy matters is protected under the Constitution, and he really should have ended it there. Note as well the massive double standard on display here. Many progressives cheered activists who stalked Kyrsten Sinema and followed her into a bathroom just a few days ago to hold this important public official to account for her stance on reconciliation, infrastructure, etc. The left is not generally shy about supporting the right of protesters to make their voices heard, even if they're loud, angry, and not very civil about it. Think of the summer of widespread unrest in 2020, where protests, often violent protests, on behalf of racial justice swept the nation. Then Senator Kamala Harris tweeted in support of a bail money fund for Black Lives Matter activists who went to jail on suspicion of rioting. The Washington Post fact-checked that. It's true. Now, if the FBI tossed a parent in jail for losing his temper during a school board meeting, I would certainly hope that self-described progressives would express similar outrage. When can we expect your contribution to that bail fund, Madam Vice President? I think we'd be waiting on that one. So this is it's FBI overreach to the very least to get them involved in what I'm not even sure is a real issue yet. Don't parents have the right to speak up if they disagree what's going on in these schools, whether they're right or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think they absolutely do. And what we're seeing is this really alarming crackdown on free speech in a variety of ways. And this is just one more element of that is extremely alarming. And I don't think it should be a surprise to anyone that after a pandemic, well, we're still in the middle of this pandemic where they're controlling our lives and constantly changing the rules on us. And it's, it feels abusive in a lot of ways by our government towards us, not knowing which day we're going to be told what we can and cannot do, and whether or not children can go to school, and do they have to wear masks or not. And, there's all of these things that are going on. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that in the middle of all of this, people are going to get angry, that people aren't just going to sit back and say, okay, tell me what to do. And okay, you told me I could have this freedom and now I can't. And, people are going to get angry. And we're seeing that, and we've been seeing that manifest in a variety of scenarios, including, like the Black Lives Matters protest, which had lots of violence and looting that took place across the country. And now we're seeing it even when parents are going back to the schools and they're in these meetings, they're starting to rise up and get angry. And so people are feeling this sort of pent up frustration. I think it's coming out. But to then label it some sort of, to be able to use, the Patriot Act in some way against these parents or against protesters, or, all the variety of ways that they're cracking down on this is extremely alarming. We should all collectively say, no, you just have to put up with us. I mean, you guys have done this to us. You have to put up with the backlash.
Nobody's saying that their speech should be restricted, but if they're making serious threats against people, then no, that's not something that we need to put up with as a civilized society. You can't make threats against people. We could post some of those videos tomorrow if we need to. It's a real thing. The anger, the frustration might be justified, but that never might be justifiable and understandable. That doesn't justify making threats against other people. It doesn't justify breaking the law, no matter who you are. And that's just what's happening, being filmed on camera. The school board members are getting plenty of even much worse threats, that are emailed to them or otherwise. So without kind of justifying some type of crackdown on parents nationwide, you also can't say that it's just anything goes, and that if you're frustrated, you should be able to say anything you want to other people.
Well, I think they're kind of calling for some sort of revolution in a way, right? I mean, that's kind of what they're doing, is they're saying we need reform. We cannot allow these school boards to run our lives and run our children's lives like this without any sort of pushback. And so they're feeling powerless. I mean, I'm not justifying it, but at the same time, what can a parent, I can understand the frustration.
Threats of violence should be investigated generally by local police. I'm not sure. I haven't seen evidence that the FBI needs to evolve itself. And some of the rhetoric, while heated, I don't think rises to that level. And frankly, I think mirrors some of the heated rhetoric about the police in this country that is justified in some sense, in some cases, for the police have done some harm, but of course you shouldn't make threats of violence against them. I see these things as
right, but some of it does cross the line.
Right. Well, and if it crosses the line, yeah, it should be.
Yeah.
That should not happen. Coming up, we'll debrief on the Facebook whistleblower testimony with all-star panelists Max Alvarez and Patrice Onwuka. That's right next. Stay with us.